All right, well, I think we're ready to begin. Hello, and thank you for joining us today. We are very excited to welcome you to the 2021 OGP Academy, the Case for Open Government, co-hosted by the Open Government Partnership and the Korean Development Institute School of Public Policy and Management. My name is Leela Abed, and I will be the Master of Ceremonies of this opening plenary session. The goal of the 2021 OGP Academy is to engage academics and experts to share new research developments in different areas of open government, to capture open government impacts inside and outside of the OGP, and to devise new future research collaborations. Over the course of this week, we will hear from leading experts on research developments across a number of areas of open government, such as access to justice, social audits and grievance redress mechanisms, open contracting, fiscal openness, political integrity, digital governance and public communication, youth participation and representation in public life, as well as citizen participation and local development. If you haven't yet, we encourage you to visit the agenda page on the events WOVA platform to view more information about these sessions and to sign up. Again, thank you all for coming, and thank you to all of our partners who will co-host the session for this week and the speakers, without whom this event would not have been made possible. To kick off this week's activities, in this session, we will hear welcome remarks from OGP CEO Sanjay Pradhan and from Dean Yeo Jung-ii, Dean of the Korean Development Institute School of Public Policy and Management. We will then hear our keynote remarks from Minister Audrey Tang, Digital Minister of Taiwan. And we will finalize our session with a presentation by Joseph Foti, the OGP's Chief Research Officer, and Renza Faya, Senior Research and Data Officer at OGP. We will begin by hearing from the co-host of this year's OGP Academy, OGP and KDIS. The Open Government Partnership is a broad partnership that includes members at the national and local level and thousands of civil society organizations. Through the partnership, these powerful forces work together to co-create two-year action plans with concrete step commitments across a broad range of issues. We will see a short video introducing OGP's work.
What will it take to solve the biggest challenges of our time? What will it take to include everyone's voice in how decisions are made? We need an idea that's bold and ambitious, with people at its heart. That idea is open government. An open government is transparent, inclusive, participatory, and accountable. So governments don't just serve themselves, they work with citizens both in and out of government to develop smarter policies and improved services that make things better for everyone. And we all get to see how decisions are made, ask questions, and hold power to account. People like you are using the Open Government Partnership to create and implement thousands of initiatives that are transforming societies around the world. Open budgets and contracts are ensuring that money isn't lost to corruption. Having a say in public services has let citizens shape the communities they live in. Equal access to the justice system and public information is open to everyone, especially the most vulnerable. The potential of technology is harnessed while safeguarding against digital threats. And our fundamental freedoms are strengthened, letting us voice our needs and concerns safely. OGP provides a platform for reformers to co-create solutions, monitor progress, and share knowledge with peers across the globe. But for this to work, we need more reformers in government to open new doors, allies outside government to help find ambitious solutions, and partners around the world to support these efforts. We need you. Join us in building a better, more open world.
And just for all of our participants' knowledge, there is live interpretation into Korean, Spanish, and French. We will now hear welcoming remarks from OGP CEO Sanjay Pradhan. Welcome.
Dear friends, 10 years ago, 8 heads of states and 9 civil society leaders came together to launch OGP. In just 10 years, 78 countries and 76 local governments, together representing more than 2 billion people, have joined the partnership along with thousands of civil society organizations. The goal of OGP, in the words of one of its founders, former US President Obama, is to ensure that government truly serves its citizens rather than itself. To achieve this, OGP empowers government reformers and civil society organizations to together co-create reforms in OGP action plans, reforms that make governments more transparent, participatory, inclusive, and accountable, while empowering citizens to shape and oversee policies and services that impact their lives. Over the last decade, government and civil society have together co-created more than 4,500 reforms. Evidence from the Independent Reporting Mechanism, or IRM, shows that when government co-creates with civil society, the action plan is more ambitious and the results are stronger. Of the 2,000 reforms that the IRM has reviewed, over 20% have been assessed to have made governments significantly more open. In summary, over its first decade, OGP has grown into a global platform with a well-functioning mechanism at scale. But over the same period, the global context worsened significantly. So at this 10th anniversary mark, when we meet at an OGP 2021 Academy, we are confronting a confluence of 5 crises. First, a crisis of democracy reflecting rising authoritarianism and plummeting citizen trust in government. Second, the pandemic health crisis. Third, a global economic crisis that accompanied the pandemic. Fourth, a crisis of inequality of income, race, and gender laid bare. And fifth, a climate crisis. But in this grim context, a set of courageous OGP reformers are advancing innovative reforms that help tackle these crises and show pathways towards a better way forward. To begin with, they're advancing innovative reforms that can renew democracy. For instance, opening up opaque contracts in Ukraine, opening up opaque budgets in South Africa, opening up company ownership in Slovakia or the UK, empowering citizens to shape budgets through participatory budgeting in Madrid, Spain, empowering citizens to oversee health and education service delivery in Kaduna, Nigeria, empowering the most marginalized groups in the Roma minority in North Macedonia, empowering women in Jalisco, Mexico by targeting the gender wage gap. Reformers are also tackling newer areas of challenges, such as targeting digital threats to democracy, disinformation online by strengthening transparency of political campaign activity in Netherlands and Canada, tackling illegal digital surveillance in Mexico. These reforms are helping show a way forward to renew democracy, but we are also seeing reformers advancing reforms that can tackle the other crises we confront. For instance, citizen monitoring of COVID-19 stimulus in Colombia, or empowering citizens with critical information on climate risks to help tackle climate change in Argentina. Our central challenge is these innovative reforms are too few and far between. We need to scale this up to match the scale of the challenge of the societal crises we confront. And that is where the vital, critical role of evidence and research comes in. For example, in Ukraine, the evidence of the impact of Dozoro's open contracting, which showed that governments saved over $1 billion, 80% of the private sector reported reduced corruption, and 50% increase in new businesses bidding for contracts. These dramatic results galvanized, in part, 70 OGP governments to commit to open contracting. We need similar research and evidence on the other areas to inform and underpin customization and scale up across other areas of open government reforms. Over the course of this week, you will be meeting scholars and researchers who have to discuss vital areas, whether it's access to justice, social audits, grievance redressal mechanisms, fiscal openness, digital governance. We need to know what works and what doesn't. Under what conditions can this be customized and scaled up? So you represent the community and the body of knowledge, which can really help us learn from the first decade of OGP at our 10th anniversary mark and take us into the next decade. But this will call on scholarship that is actionable. We need your help in turning rigorous scholarship into actionable programs, and concrete results. And that is our call to you, our request to you at this 2021 OGP Academy. This is a really important task. You can help guide us and take us forward. We look forward to the results of your deliberations and wish you the best in the days ahead. Thank you so much.
Very important, the issues that CEO Sanjay Pradhan pointed out, particularly after the pandemic. It is definitely critical to strengthen democratic governments, empower citizens, and turning scholarship into programs with concrete results. We will now hear from the Korean Development Institute School of Public Policy and Management. Among many activists at KDIS, the Open Government and Innovation Lab conducts groundworking work, developing experimental and behavioral approaches to open government issues, and providing evidence-based advice to governments, international organizations, think tanks, civil society, and the private sector. Meanwhile, the school educates our next generation of scholars and practitioners, providing them with the skill set they need to make an impact. KDI has prepared a video for us. We will now hear welcoming remarks from Dean Yeo Jung-il, Dean of the Korean Development Institute School of Public Policy and Management. Welcome.
Congratulations on marking the 10th anniversary of Open Government Partnerships, OGP. It's a great pleasure to co-host the OGP Academy Conference in celebration of this milestone. Especially at this time, when we are searching for a new paradigm and strategy that would be fitting to a post-COVID-19, or as we begin to realize, a with COVID-19 future. OGP has become an important platform for government reforms and social innovation based on the public values and principles of participation and cooperation, communication and deliberation, and transparency and accountability. Its reach encompasses key government officials, various policy stakeholders, and myriad civil society organizations in both developed and developing countries around the world. OGP has established itself as a leader in government innovation and contributed to strengthening the relationship between the government and citizens, and to enriching ecosystems for democracy and social inclusion. OGP's expertise on the strategies of government innovation is even more important today as we face existential threats and challenges, such as global epidemics and global warming. This conference will present various studies that speak to the core concerns of OGP. It will address future roles and responsibilities of government and civil society, covering wide-ranging topics such as digital governance, public communication, citizen participation, youth and intergenerational justice, transparency, social inclusion, and political integrity. It will feature empirical studies utilizing data-driven and multidisciplinary approaches, as well as philosophical reflections and theoretical arguments. I believe in the power of cross-fertilization of different perspectives and look forward to the dialogues among experts coming from various fields. I have no doubt that this conference will make important contributions to a policy knowledge ecosystem and a social entrepreneurship that enable us to effectively cope with wicked problems in uncertain future. And I'm sure that the insights and wisdom of the participants this week will provide guiding lights to OGP's next steps toward greater influence and impact. A final remark I would like to make is about the importance of going beyond knowledge and rhetoric. We must translate these into practical outcomes and thereby bring about real changes on the ground. In the future, OGP will need to focus on closing the gap between as is and to be. In order to do so, blueprints must be shared, implementable strategies must be developed, and concrete action plans must be drawn. And I can't emphasize enough that citizens must be informed and involved in all of this. Citizen participation and expertise must be embedded within, quote unquote, government innovation in daily life. On this front, we have a lot of work to do in terms of improving data, information, knowledge, and the culture of collaboration. I sincerely hope that this week's conference will help governments and civil society to dream bigger, share a vision, and co-create knowledge for sustainable and resilient open government partnerships. Thank you very much.
Very important what we just heard from Dean Chu Jong-Il, particularly about strengthening governments and citizens and empowering citizens and enriching democracies and social inclusion, especially with the challenges that the world is facing, such as global change. And I think that is why he, spoke about the importance and about translating scholarship into practical outcomes to bring about real change. And now I am honored to introduce our illustrious keynote speaker, Ministry Audrey Tang, Digital Minister of Taiwan. Audrey is known for revitalizing the computer languages Perl and Haskell, as well as building the online spreadsheet system EtherCalc in collaboration with Dan Bricklin. In the public sector, Audrey served on Taiwan's National Development Council's Open Data Committee and the 12-year Basic Education Curriculum Committee, and led the country's first e-rulemaking project. In the private sector, Audrey worked as a consultant with Apple on computational linguistics, with Oxford University Press on crowd lexicography, and with social text on social interaction design. In the social sector, Audrey actively contributes to GovZero, a vibrant community focusing on creating tools for the civil society with the call to fork the government. For the members of the audience, we encourage you to submit any question for Minister Tang through the Q&A function. Please join me in welcoming Minister Tang.
Good local time, everyone. This is Audrey Tang, Taiwan's Digital Minister. It is my great pleasure and honor to be here virtually at the 2021 OGP Academy and share some thoughts with you about Taiwan's digital democracy. As Digital Minister of Taiwan, I suppose it makes perfect sense for me to travel digitally across time zones and boundaries to be part of this very meaningful event. However, I believe many of you would also agree when I say it is really a pity that a pandemic made it difficult for me to join you in person. I remember the last time I traveled to Korea. It was mid-January 2020, literally the week before the pandemic, and I had the opportunity to have face-to-face discussions with so many top-notch experts and scholars and shook hands with friends from all over the world. Indeed, the COVID-19 pandemic threw the world off balance. It brought drastic changes. In many parts of the world, we have seen symptoms of democracy in backslide, and some authoritarian regimes have tried to justify the measures of state surveillance and restrictions in the name of public health. Of course, there is never an easy way to tackle emerging challenges, but I see opportunities arise among the biggest global crises of our time. When we are faced with this shared challenge that confronts the global population, in Taiwan, I see digital social innovations continue to accelerate democracy and also deepen collaboration across all sectors. In Taiwan, democracy is seen as an applied social technology that improves when more people work together to achieve a common goal, just like any other technologies. It works as a vehicle to turn the energy spread across different agencies and sectors into a driving force for policy innovation. And the trick is to enable the concept of working with the people, not just for the people, to permeate public policy decision-making. In other words, it is important to unleash the power of crowdsourcing democracy. So, how do we start to bring ourselves to work with the people? Well, for me, the answer is simple. It's to trust our citizens. Because to give no trust is to get no trust. And the first step towards such mutual trust is transparency. A few days ago, I met with a delegation from the European Parliament. One of the delegation members have heard about how facial recognition was used by some authoritarian regimes, and he was curious about how AI and digital technologies are seen and adopted in Taiwan. And my answer was that in pluralistic democracies, AI should stand for assistive intelligence rather than authoritarian intelligence. And while digital tools are used to make their citizens transparent to the state for authoritarian regimes, in Taiwan, we are using digital technologies to make the state and our decision-making process radically transparent to the people. And that is why in Taiwan, we have dedicated ourselves to bring technologies into the spaces where citizens are, rather than expect citizens to adapt to the space where the technologists are. So much like how the tip of Taiwan raises 2 or 3 centimeters each year because of the earthquakes from clashing tectonic plates hits us, we have built resilient, democratic infrastructures to invite completely different ends of the spectrums. Those ideas, thoughts, feelings with markedly different initial positions to come to the virtual table to discuss and also to co-create. A great example is the one-stop online civic participation platform called Join the GOV.tw, where anyone can file a petition and participate in policy making. Face-to-face, cross-ministerial collaborative meetings are held twice monthly to explore ways to incorporate ideas from the petitions with more than 5,000 signatures into policy making. Literally anyone, not just citizens, but residents, global citizens, people younger than the voting age, they can and they do play a role in our decision-making process. So far, we have held more than 100 collaborative meetings this way. As of October 2021, there have been close to 30 million visits to join the gov.tw. And Taiwan, well, we're just a country with population of 23 million. And we're also using digital technologies to crowdsource solutions to address globally shared challenges from a presidential or a country-wide scale. For example, we have a dedicated annual event called the Presidential Hackathon, which invites citizens from around the world to propose solutions based on open data to global issues such as climate change, and also anti-corruption, smart cities, and so on. Every year, 5 winning teams receive a trophy from President Tsai Ing-wen that carries the promise in the form of a projector of realizing their ideas on a national scale in the following fiscal year. When you turn on the projector, it projects the presidential promise. So with this mechanism, mutual trust and dialogue between the social, public, and private sectors are reliably discovered and amplified. Digital democracy also played an important role in our fight against the pandemic. I believe the reason we were able to counter the pandemic with no lockdown and the infodemic with no takedown is based on the 3 pillars of fast, fair, and fun. Fast is for fast response, fair for fair access for all, and fun for humor over rumor, turning outrage into creativity so we can overcome difficulties together. So with these key values, we can find opportunities for people-public-private partnerships, and even the smallest idea can be augmented and amplified into a strong force for good. A good example was last February's face mask maps, initiated by social entrepreneurs working with the decentralized community of Join the G0V.tw GovZero, a group of civic technologists in Taiwan. To prevent the panic buying of medical masks, we instituted a national rationing scheme. In February last year, we also released the API, the application programming interface, to provide the public with real-time location-specific data on mask availability. And within just only a few days, more than 100 different maps and chatbots were created so that people can look at the details of where masks are stocked and their numbers. And just after 1 month, it was adopted in Korea. Similarly, in May this year, when Taiwan faced the real first wave and only wave so far of COVID, the early measures to record the contact information for those entering and leaving public venues led to the quick development of the 1922 SMS contact tracing system, again from GovZero, in just 3 days. So it's not a government technology. It's intuitive, it's app-free. It is an easy way to check in at public places without any compromise on anyone's privacy. You don't have to download any app. It's based on the well-understood principle of QR code and SMS. And anyone can look up who has accessed these records from the contact tracing offices in the past 4 weeks. And we're also using the power of crowdsourcing in the people-public-private partnership to fight against the infodemic, to relieve the pandemic anxiety that has stoked the flames of disinformation. Instead of using any centralized takedown, shutdown, lockdown initiatives, we focus instead on a decentralized, human-centered approach. The humor over rumor tactic, for example, gives the public room to laugh at non-factual information. We also put an emphasis on media competence instead of media literacy, such that the people can see themselves as contributors to journalism. So middle schoolers, for example, can fact-check our 3 presidential candidates in real time as they were having their debates. Compared to the censorships, I believe this is a far more long-lasting solution or vaccination of the mind to the ongoing infodemic. The word democracy comes from ancient Greek that combines demos, people, and kratos, power. It means power according to the will of the people on behalf of the people. And in Taiwan, we're making efforts to demonstrate how the use of digital platforms can strengthen democracy by giving everyone a voice and enabling a government that works, as I said, with the people. Supported by meaningful and affordable internet access. Even on the tip of Taiwan, broadband costs just $15 a month, no restrictions on the data rate. Because we believe that human rights, freedom of speech, and democracy are not to be traded in any shape or form. There is a crack in everything, and that is how the light gets in. When faced with this shared challenge that confronts the global population, an opportunity emerges to form shared goals, bringing all hands on deck to crowdsource for ideas that unlocks our collective intelligence and connective intelligence to march toward a free, open, democratic, and resilient world. To conclude, I would like to share with you my own job description that I wrote when I joined the cabinet in 2016 as a digital minister. It goes like this. When we see the Internet of Things, let's make it an Internet of Beings. When we see virtual reality, let's make it a shared reality. When we see machine learning, let's make it collaborative learning. When we see user experience, let's make it about human experience. And whenever we hear that singularity is near, let's always remember the plurality is here. Thank you all for listening. Live long and prosper.
Thank you, Minister Tang. It's extremely important what you mentioned about digital democracy and how authoritarian regimes have restrained digital democracy in the name of public health during this pandemic. And therefore, it is of essence to work, like you said, with the people and not just for the people, so that they can have a direct impact on public policy making. And like you mentioned, this is done by trusting citizens through transparency. Thank you very much for your remarks, Minister Tang. We now open for the Q&A session. Please submit your questions on the Q&A module down below. But I will begin, Minister Tang, by asking you one question. In your opinion, what are the current and future greatest challenges to democracy around the world? And how can the open government community help to overcome them?
Certainly. So in our world of the free and democratic societies, the association of the word social media and AI are now almost automatically undemocratic. Like it always leads to polarization and things like that. But in Taiwan, we have been working with what I call social media for at least 5 years now. And we have shown quite clearly that if we interpret AI as assistive intelligence and ask people to reflect on each other's feelings instead of, just jumping from facts into ideas, then actually this place of kind of humming along and finding the good enough consensus builds the rapport between people of very different positions. The very quick example was in 2015. we first introduced the use of assistive intelligence tool Polis. It's now part of our public digital infrastructure at polis.gov.tw. At the time, anyone who feels anything about Uber phenomena can agree or disagree on each other's feelings. So for example, if you agree passenger liability is important, you click agree and you move toward me. But if you click disagree, you move farther away from me. But there's no reply button, no room for troll to grow. So that after 3 weeks of not deliberation, really just resonating with one another's feelings, we get into this shape where people do disagree on the right, some 5 ideological statements like gig economy versus sharing economy, but mostly everyone agree with their neighbors on their feelings on most probably all of the topics. So about insurance, about empowering local temple and churches, not undercutting existing meters, labor rights, and so on, everyone resonates. So I believe if we reassociate AI to assistive intelligence to connect people, not machines, and reassociate social media with pro-social media, then we do get the power of crowdsourcing of democracy.
Very interesting. And Minister Tang, how can we convince skeptics to adopt open government reforms, especially in this era after the pandemic, like you mentioned?
Yeah, definitely. That's a really great question. In my opinion, the public servants themselves are also citizens. So one of the key reform tip that I use is basically when we collaborate to reform existing services, we delegate to the participation officers in the ministries unrelated to the reform at hand. So when we reform, for example, the tax service to draw together the tax filing experience out of a petition, well, it may be the participation officer of the Ocean Patrol hosting the breakout group. But when we talk about ocean surfing and things like that, open the ocean policies, then it may be it's the public service of the taxation or finance ministries. And the reason is simple, because they automatically take the side of citizens and make demands, not trapped in their silos. The Ocean Patrol actually file their tax by themselves, and also the Ministry of Taxation or Finance also are maybe amateur surfers and so on. So by working across silos and basically not thinking too much about a dichotomy between public service and the public, we were able to then convince the public servants because they, for once, are on the citizen side.
Very interesting. Now, open data reforms, Mr. Tang, are becoming more popular. How can we know that citizens assign social value to these reforms? And how can we go beyond transparency and into true citizen participation, like you mentioned in your remarks?
Yeah, so I would like to elaborate a little bit on the idea of competence, not just literacy in our data and media competence educations. In Taiwan, all the primary schools have at least one air box where people can measure the PM 2.5 and other air quality measures and contribute to climate science and the distributed ledger. Now, for the primary schoolers, it's actually very difficult to teach them anything about data bias or data stewardship and so on. But it's easy to learn once they contribute to climate science and their friends and family start to rely on their contributed weather measurements in order to determine whether they want to go out and jog and things like that. So on middle school, for example, we have the fact-checking exercises, but they're not just exercises. They were actually fed back to the national level presidential debates on public TV and so on. So basically, we link into immediate social impact. So this open data is not one way, like from the government to people, but really both ways. It's about mutual accountability, and the citizen contributed data immediately have a policy impact.
We have a question from Auda Oliver Yakubu, and this is the question. How do we ensure that citizens attain global digital literacy in line with SDG goals?
This is a great question. In our presidential hackathon, for example, all the more than 200 projects each year must correspond to one or more of the Sustainable Development Goals. So people learn almost by immersion. And we use a novel voting technique from the Ethereum community called quadratic voting. So instead of people going to vote online just dumping all the votes on one particular pet project and then just go away without consulting the synergies between the economic, societal, and environmental parts of SDGs. The quadratic voting allocates 99 points to each voter. And then because it's quadratic, when you vote 1 vote, 1 point cost, 2 votes, 4 points, 3 votes, 9 points, and so on. With 99 points, one can vote 9 votes, that's 81 points, but with 18 left, and you can't cast the 10th vote. So using this novel voting method, on average, each person will look at least 4 or 5 different SDGs and thinking about their synergies. And at the end of the day, when we announce the top 20, instead of traditional dot voting or single voting, where most people feel they have lost, actually everyone feel they have won because at least 1 or 2 of projects they supported made it to the top 20. And through quadratic voting, we review the synergy, so the teams that didn't make the cut can get reassembled into the winning teams. And the 5 champions receive from our president, Dr. Tsai Ing-wen, this trophy with a micro projector underneath. And when you project it, it shows the video of the president handing you the trophy. So it's self-descriptory. Whatever you did for the past 3 months for that particular SDG, we committed to make it a nationwide policy with all the personnel, budgetary, and regulation requirements within the next fiscal year.
We have another question from the audience. Is e-government important in achieving a viable democracy?
Well, I would think digital, if it's not democratically governed, doesn't last. Right? I talk about the antisocial part of social media, but democracy and open government without digital does not scale, because it simply incurs too much of a burden on the incoming bandwidth of the government without the assistive intelligence, the crowd moderation, and so on. So they are like yin and yang, I believe, that democracy, open democracy, and the digitalization support each other.
Speaking of digital governance, where do we draw the line between this distinction that you made between the Internet of Things and the Internet of Things? Is there a trade-off between digital development and human-centered approaches?
Yeah, I believe the IT or digitization is all about connecting more machines, but digitalization, with the all in digitalization, is all about connecting more people, being more inclusive, right? So I don't think this is a trade-off. For without co-creation with people closest to the pain, we do not actually get the social innovations that will make the adoption natural or normal according to the social norm. But if we just focus on connecting people together, again, without a scalable listening, empathy technology supported by IT, by digitization, then of course it doesn't scale. It ends up creating a burden on the public service. So I see that the IT, the Internet of Things, supports the Internet of Beings, the digitalization part.
Minister Tang, thank you so much for your time, your knowledge, and for being here with us this morning.
Thank you for the great questions, and live long and prosper.
Thank you. We will now turn to Joseph Foti, OGP's Chief Research Office, and Renzo Faya, Senior Research and Data Officer at OGP, to hear about the latest research in open government taken from their upcoming publications, the OGP Decade Report and Vital Signs.
Great. Welcome, everyone. On behalf of the OGP Support Unit, Independent Reporting Mechanism, that's obviously a hard act to follow, but I can commit to not being as interesting or impressive. So here I go. So first, thank you to our co-sponsors, KDIS, colleagues, session organizers, participants. I just want to give a very particular thanks to colleagues who did a lot of the organizing for this whole week. Sang-Woo Park, Taejun Lee, Paulina Ornelas, Chetan Raj, Megan Wallace, and OGP's communications team. And again, thank you, Minister Tang. I'm sure we have a million more questions, and hopefully people can go see the open government action plan in 12 hours launch, or read it if depending on your time zone. Great. And we are here to look at this week for the case for open governments. This is a little bit different from other years. We want to know what works, what we even mean by works. I'm sure many of you have interesting debates on that, and where the weak spots are in the evidence. So we've organized a week around particular policies and areas of interest. And that's, I think, where the action is right now in research. Specifically, there's research on which particular policies result in very particular outcomes or results, however you define them. For example, as people have said, maybe open contracting, the evidence is beginning to point to more equitable competition, or open justice may lead to better health outcomes. And we want to know why, when, under what conditions. At the same time, by the end of the week, we don't want to lose the forest for the trees. By the end of the week, I hope all of these sessions collectively begin to paint a picture of both the solid ground and the boundaries of what we know about this bundle of ideas called open government. But before we talk about let's take a step back from the research. Why are you all here? Some of you at very odd hours tuning in. Some of you will be on YouTube later. I assume you're here because you want to hear a few ideas that you haven't heard, a few ways of putting things that you haven't thought of before. And you probably are here to see the people who are putting the puzzle pieces together collectively. And it's that people thing that I think is important. So to that end, I know we're virtual, and I know it isn't as good as having lunch and sandwiches, in the faculty lounge somewhere, but I hope you take the time to reach out to one another through chat, to follow up with people based on their links on the Whova site. It's my experience that more than a few really good, fantastic research projects have started at OGP Academies, and we hope to keep that happening. So what makes them really great is that all of you are transdisciplinary, you're engaged, your research is useful. We have practitioners presenting and participating. We have scholars participating and presenting. And I know there's some of you who wouldn't describe yourselves as either one of those two things. And that's actually good and great. And let's make sure that mix keeps happening. So the rest of the week is going to be open government more generally. What we know, what we don't, what we need to know. But for today, I want to turn over to my colleague, Renzo Faya, who will talk about OGP specifically and some of the research that's coming out about OGP. And he has been taking the 200 or so action plans that have been evaluated by the independent reporting mechanism, data from other organizations that some of you work for, and he's going to tell you what the patterns are around that data and what it shows us.
Thanks, Joe. I'm going to try to do that in 5 minutes. Thanks for having me, the organizers. Thanks for putting this great week together. As Joe said, I want to talk a bit about the OGP Vital Signs Research Project. So OGP has collected a lot of data in its first 10 years. As Sanjay mentioned earlier, OGP members have now submitted more than 300 action plans, a total of more than 4,500 commitments. And thanks to the IRM, as Joe mentioned, we now have 10 years worth of data on the quality of these commitments and the quality of the OGP process more broadly. So the goal of this project, quite simply, was to understand if the OGP action plan process is working as intended. So we looked at everything from co-creation between government and civil society through to implementation and outcomes. And I want to mention 4 particular findings today that are relevant not just for OGP, but for the open government community more broadly. And they fall into the 4 categories at the top of the slide: civil society, commitments, policy areas, and learning. So I'll start with civil society. And if there's one finding you'll remember from today, let it be this one. We find that civil society involvement is associated with better OGP outcomes. In other words, when civil society is engaged throughout the OGP process, co-creation through to implementation, action plans tend to be more ambitious, they tend to be better implemented, and they produce more changes, more actual changes in government practices. So, in other words, this suggests that civil society involvement in OGP not only holds intrinsic value, but it may be instrumental to achieving change. Now, looking at commitments, the object of this co-creation between government and civil society, much of Vital Signs focuses on this, and so there are a lot of findings. But the one I wanted to mention today is that income is the strongest predictor of commitment implementation. The difference in the rate of implementation between the highest income and the lowest income OGP countries is nearly 35%. This points to an implementation gap in OGP, one that the support units and technical partners and donors are already working to address. But it highlights the challenge of implementing these reforms in several contexts. But not all commitments are equal. They vary widely in their scope, and that's why I want to talk about policy areas next. As you've heard, OGP commitments address a variety of topics, from procurement to algorithmic transparency. And after reviewing all of these commitments and the policy areas that they address, we find that a commitment's performance largely depends on the policy area it addresses. For example, commitments related to anti-corruption topics like open contracting and extractive industries consistently have produced strong results and changes in open government practices. In particular, we find that OGP countries that have advanced beneficial ownership transparency and open budgets through their action plans have become more open in these areas than other countries. On the flip side, in other areas where we've seen less progress, such as on civic space and fundamental freedoms, a lot more needs to be done. The last thing I wanted to mention is around learning, and specifically in the context of OGP, that means the Independent Reporting Mechanism, or IRM. And here, we find that learning from the IRM is associated with higher quality action plans. So specifically, when governments implement IRM recommendations related to the content of their action plans or how they set up the OGP process, they tend to have more ambitious commitments and engage with civil society in a more collaborative way, even when we control for other factors. This highlights the importance of learning and adaptation over the course of the OGP process, and it points to the role of the IRM, the role that the IRM can play in enabling it. So as you can imagine, I've only scratched the surface of what's in this research. And if these types of findings are of interest, I highly encourage you to see the executive summary of the report, which we've just launched today, has many more similar findings. The full report will be launched at the OGP Global Summit next month, so look out for that. With that, thanks for your attention, and back over to you, Joe.
Thanks, Renzo. Renzo's work is part of a much larger, broader group of research projects coming out about OGP and what policies and what can be done over the next several years. So colleagues, do please stay tuned. We have a 10-year decade report, which takes and synthesizes research over the course of the last 10 years on OGP's future. There will be an independent evaluation of OGP published in January by Oxford Policy Management, Open Justice, and then of course this week will culminate in a OGP Skeptics Guide 2, which is a summary of the research. And we will be talking with our colleagues on Thursday, just a quick advertisement, Friday, on Global Data Barometer's new data on political integrity. So I have very, very many things coming up. Let me know if we can be of any additional assistance, but thank you so much for your active participation. And I'm looking forward to hearing from all of you this week.
Thank you, Joseph Foti and Renzo Faya, for your remarks. This concludes the opening session for the 2021 OGP Academy. Thank you again to all of our wonderful speakers, our keynote speaker, Minister Audrey Tang, to everyone who made this event possible, and you, our attendees. We look forward to seeing you in our sessions this week, and thank you for being here today.